The first time Aisha didn't come home until morning, Idris didn't ask questions. That was his mistake. If he had, maybe things wouldn't have gone as far as they did. Maybe he could have protected her sooner. That morning, when she finally walked through the door, her eyes were red and swollen, her clothes rumpled and dirty. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all. There was a faint bruise on her arm, half hidden by the sleeve of her dress. But before Idris could ask what had happened, Tiwa appeared behind her and spoke first. "She was helping me," Tiwa said, her voice calm and sweet. "You know how lazy this girl is. I kept her busy." Idris nodded, accepting the explanation without another word. But Aisha's silence should have told him everything. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even look at him. She just kept her head down, her shoulders slumped, and walked slowly to her room without eating breakfast. That morning wasn't the first time something felt off, but it was the first time Idris noticed it. There had been little things before: Aisha's growing quietness, the way she flinched when someone raised their voice, the way she avoided eye contact. But he told himself she was still grieving her mother. He thought she just needed time. But after that morning, the signs became harder to ignore. Aisha started coming home late more often. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until long after dark, and sometimes she didn't come home at all. When she did return, she was always tired, her clothes messy, her face pale and drawn. "What errands take so long?" Idris asked one night when Aisha stumbled through the door well past midnight. "She's a slow walker," Tiwa said with a shrug. "You know how she is." Aisha didn't say a word. As time went on, Idris noticed other things, too. Aisha's once bright laughter faded. She stopped playing with the other children in the village and spent more and more time alone. Her clothes, once neat and well-kept, were often torn or dirty. She grew thinner, her face hollow and tired. And the most disturbing thing was the fear in her eyes, a fear she tried to hide but couldn't completely mask. But every time Idris tried to talk to her, Tiwa would step in. "She's just being difficult," she would say, brushing off his concerns. "Teenage girls are like this." And Idris, not knowing what else to do, believed her. But Aisha's silence was growing heavier. And one day, it would break. Idris married Tiwa less than a year after Aisha's mother passed away. The village gossiped, but Idris paid no mind. He was a respected man, a hardworking farmer and a loving father. When he brought Tiwa home, people whispered that he had rushed into marriage, but he insisted that Aisha needed a mother. Tiwa was beautiful, her skin was smooth and dark, her smile warm. At first, she seemed perfect. She cooked well, kept the house clean, and always spoke softly and respectfully. But there was a coldness in her eyes, something Idris never noticed but Aisha felt from the start. The change started slowly. At first, it was the small things. Tiwa would give Aisha the hardest chores, scrubbing the floors until her hands blistered, fetching water from the farthest well. If Aisha complained, Tiwa would sigh and shake her head. "You're so lazy," she'd say. "No wonder your father needed me." When Aisha's clothes started disappearing, she thought she was imagining things. But then she found her favorite dress, the one her mother had made, torn and stained behind the house. When she showed it to Idris, Tiwa laughed. "She's careless," she said. "She probably ruined it herself and doesn't want to admit it." The worst was when Aisha's bracelet went missing, the delicate silver one her mother had given her. She searched everywhere, crying quietly in her room. Days later, she found it crushed in the dirt behind the house. When she confronted Tiwa, the woman only smiled. "Perhaps you misplaced it," she said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. Idris never questioned Tiwa's words. But Aisha knew the truth. And she knew things were only going to get worse. It started with nights away from home, one night, then two. Aisha would leave in the morning with Tiwa and not return until the next day. When Idris asked, the answers were always vague. "She's helping me at the market," Tiwa would say. "The stores are busy, and we sometimes stay with my sister when it's too late to travel back." But Aisha never mentioned any market when she was home. She rarely spoke at all anymore. Her face had become a mask, her voice a whisper. The light in her eyes was gone. One evening, Idris found her sitting behind the house, knees drawn to her chest, tears running down her face. "Aisha, my child, what's wrong?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, silent. "Talk to me," he pleaded. "Whatever it is, we'll fix it." Before she could speak, the back door creaked open. Tiwa stood there, arms crossed, eyes hard. "Leave her be," she said. "She's just being dramatic." But the fear in Aisha's eyes said otherwise. Then, one day, Aisha didn't come home at all. Idris waited through the night, his heart pounding with every hour that passed. At dawn, he went to Tiwa. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded. "She's with my sister," Tiwa said smoothly. "I told you, the market's been busy." But Idris's patience had run out. He went to the village and asked around. No one had seen Aisha at the market. No one had seen Tiwa's supposed sister. Panic rose in his chest. When he confronted Tiwa, her calm facade cracked. "You worry too much," she snapped. "The girl is fine." But Idris didn't believe her anymore. And he knew it was time to find out the truth. The search begins. The search started immediately. Idris gathered a few trusted men from the village and began asking questions. They searched the markets, the wells, and even the outskirts of the village. The more they searched, the clearer it became, Tiwa had been lying. Finally, they reached a small hut on the outskirts of the village, a place few people visited. The air was thick with unease. Idris knocked on the door, his hands trembling. An old woman answered, her eyes darting nervously. "I haven't seen her," she whispered, but her voice wavered. She tried to shut the door, but before she could, a sound came from inside, a muffled sob. Idris's heart raced. He pushed the door open, stepping inside despite the woman's protest. The room was dim and smelled of damp earth, and his eyes quickly adjusted to the shadows. In the far corner, huddled and trembling, was Aisha. Her face was streaked with tears, her arms bruised and thin. The room was cold, and she wore nothing but a thin dress, her feet bare and dirty. When she saw her father, a choked cry escaped her lips. "Baba!" He rushed to her, gathering her in his arms. She clung to him, her entire body shaking. "It's okay, my child. I'm here. I'm here," he whispered, trying to soothe her. As he held her, he turned to the old woman. "Who brought her here?" he demanded, his voice fierce. The woman's eyes darted toward the door, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "It was Tiwa," she finally whispered. Rage flooded Idris's chest. He looked down at his daughter, the bruises on her arms telling a story of pain and fear. "We are going home," he said softly, but his eyes burned with fury. And Tiwa would answer for what she had done. When Idris confronted Tiwa, she denied everything at first, her face a mask of calm. But Aisha's bruises and the old woman's trembling words were evidence enough. The village elders were called, and slowly, the horrifying truth began to emerge. Tiwa had been using Aisha, forcing her into dangerous and degrading situations under the guise of helping with the market. The nights away had nothing to do with selling goods and everything to do with Tiwa's greed and cruelty. As Aisha's voice returned, she told them everything, the threats, the fear, the pain she had endured in silence. She described long nights spent in unfamiliar houses, where she was forced to work in harsh conditions without food or rest. She spoke of strange men who treated her roughly and the constant terror that kept her from running away. But it was worse than anyone had imagined. Tiwa had been selling Aisha to men from neighboring towns, promising them whatever they wanted if the price was right. Aisha described being locked in rooms with no windows, hearing the voices of men negotiating outside the door. Sometimes she was dragged away in the middle of the night, transported to places she didn't know, only to return battered and exhausted. She explained how Tiwa manipulated her, warning that if she ever spoke up, Idris would suffer. "Your father won't believe you," Tiwa had whispered. "And if you tell anyone, something terrible will happen to him." The fear of losing her father kept Aisha silent, even when her body and spirit were breaking. The villagers listened, their faces dark with anger and sorrow. Many were horrified. They had seen Aisha's change but never imagined the nightmare she was living. Idris felt his heart shatter with every word. How had he not seen it? How had he trusted this woman with his daughter's life? The guilt weighed heavily on him. The elders acted swiftly. Tiwa was cast out of the village, her crimes too great to forgive. But the damage she had done would take far longer to heal. In the days that followed, Aisha slowly began to recover. The village rallied around them, offering support and love. The laughter that had once faded began to return, though it came slowly and with caution. Idris held his daughter close, vowing never to let her suffer again. And though the scars remained, both seen and unseen, they were a testament to her strength and survival. The evil that had lived among them was gone. But the lessons of vigilance and love would remain forever.